Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Calling All Creatures. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about California condors. The podcast title is actually back from the Brink, the California condor story. And I have Kelly Sorenson on with me, who's the executive director at Ventana Wildlife Society, and also just happens to have a whole lot of information on California condors. So I am really stoked that he's on tonight with us, and he can give us more information about the California condor. Thanks for being on the podcast tonight, Kelly. Really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
So why don't you just go ahead and tell us a little bit about, what kind of first drew you to wildlife conservation, and how did you kind of have your path go towards the condors? How did they come into your life?
I guess I've always loved animals. From a little kid, I remember always being drawn to animals, and my dad used to tell a story where he wanted to go deer hunting one time, and I gave him a frown look or whatever, and he didn't want to go hunting after that. Of course, later on, I was a teenager. I developed an interest in hunting. But anyway, I've always loved animals, and when I was in college, I found this red-tailed hawk nest, and I was really interested in those birds and was studying them, and they failed. And I didn't know why. That really piqued my curiosity, and at the time I was kind of more going in the direction of wildlife photography, but I think at that moment it just clicked, and I realized I wanted to do something more to help recover animals back in nature.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a good cause.
Well, and you asked about the condors, and they didn't enter my life until many, many years later, after I finished my undergraduate degree and came out to California to release bald eagles to the wild, and we finished that effort in 1995 and was very successful in Central California. It far exceeded our goals. And right at that time, I was just finishing my undergraduate degree, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service reached out to Ventana Wildlife Society and asked if we wanted to release California condors to the wild.
Oh, very cool. So that was more or less your first encounters with the condors then, was being asked to do that.
That's right. I had studied bald eagles and worked with peregrine falcons before that, and a lot of other birds of prey at a rehab center, and a ton of handling, and just really fell in love with these birds. But I never once thought I'd be working with the California condor, and it just so happens that our sanctuary that we release bald eagles on the Big Sur coast also is suitable for California condors. So we use the same exact location, and we were invited in 1995. Our first release of California condors to Big Sur was in 1997, and we've been at it ever since.
Well, that's pretty cool. So how interesting. You got to work with bald eagles and the peregrine falcon, which is another cool bird, and then on to the condors. That's pretty wild. I mean, so now we're going to find out hopefully a little bit more about condors and stuff too. Are the condors larger than the bald eagles?
Oh yeah, the California condor is the largest North American land bird with a wingspan of 9.5 feet, and the bald eagle has a wingspan of about 7 feet. So that 2.5 extra feet is quite noticeable. And if you've seen a turkey vulture, most people have, maybe they don't know it, but they're widespread all across North America. They have about a 6-foot wingspan. So you're talking about a third larger the California condor is.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah, I actually have some pictures of turkey vultures that were outside of where I worked, and they were standing there and they had their wings stretched out and stuff, and it looked pretty awesome to see them like that. So now I can just imagine the wingspan from the condor.
Oh yeah,
that's pretty cool.
It is impressive. to see condors sunning. We call that sunning behavior, where they have their wings out, and it's really neat to see a group of condors all doing that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can imagine. So, in your opinion, what kind of makes the condor such a unique and meaningful species to protect? Because they actually are in need of protection. I mean, they're coming back, but a lot of stuff has happened over the years with them.
You know, for me, I've just fallen in love with this species because of their just incredible uniqueness in personalities. These birds are truly individuals, and you really see it in how they express themselves behaviorally, and it's really fascinating to me because we'll put it this way. I knew that condors were very different than any other bird of prey the first time I handled one. Because any other bird of prey, when you handle them and you put a hood over their head and make it dark, close off their view, they calm down. And in some cases, they'll even fall asleep in your arms. I had a baby bald eagle fall asleep in my arms once with a hood on, and it would start drooling on it. You put a hood on a California condor and they freak out. They just can't stand it. And as soon as you take the hood off and they can see what you're doing, even if you're injecting them with a needle or something, something uncomfortable, they immediately relax because they can see what you're doing. And to me, that's just really extraordinary and totally different than any other bird I've ever worked with. So it says something about how unique these birds are. And so that's a big one for me. But, I've always been drawn to endangered species because I feel like, we should do better. In every case I can think of, endangered species became that way because of human activity, and not to point blame, but to find solutions moving forward. And that's kind of how I've just, devoted my career this whole time.
So, and like I just mentioned, they do need some protections, but for those that may not know, how close did the California condors actually come to extinction?
Well, they were very close to extinction. And by the way, I forgot to also mention that, there's another reason why condors and other scavengers are important, and that's the niche that they fill in our ecosystem. Imagine if all these dead animals laying around in the landscape were eaten by scavengers, then what kind of health problems we might have and so on. And in fact, in India, when a vulture population crash occurred, dogs and diseases associated with a big increase in dog population did pour over and affect the human population. So we know that scavengers are beneficial to humans and the ecosystem, and I didn't want that point to get missed. I always tend to start with more of the emotional response, but there's an ecological balance imperative there too.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I mean, people don't realize just how important pretty much every animal is in the ecosystem they're in. It's like here, the coyote and stuff like that, and the turkey vultures and everything. People don't like the coyotes here because they're so afraid they're going to take their little animals and all this other stuff. But they're a part of the ecosystem, and they do take care of a lot of the scavenging and like you said, the dead animals and stuff like that.
Yeah, so before I forget, you had asked about how close did it come, and they were down to just 22 individuals in 1982.
Yeah.
So literally just 22 lives away from being gone forever. And it really was the heroic efforts of zoos in the first place that captured them all up and brought them into captivity to begin captive breeding. And at the time, people didn't know if it was going to even work or not. And then, fast forward to the late 90s when I got involved and Ventana Wildlife Society got involved, our focus has been primarily on the release of those captive bred birds to the wild, and then figuring out, causes of death. What are the limitations out there that are holding back the population, and so that we can address those.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and back when that population declined, what were some of the biggest factors that caused that to happen?
Well, the biggest cause of excessive mortality back then and still today is the ingestion of lead ammunition. Lead is extremely poisonous when it's ingested, and so I'm not talking about being shot. Lead bullets are still the most commonly type of bullet used out there. But a lot of animals that are shot, like ground squirrels and things that aren't game animals, are shot and they're left out in the landscape. And scavengers like condors and eagles, they come by and they eat those and ingest whole fragments of ammunition. And when that happens, it's extremely toxic. And believe it or not, it happens so often because condors are obligate scavengers. They don't ever take live prey. So they're eating dead animals that are shot all the time. Every day or every other day perhaps. And so they're experiencing the exposure of lead poisoning probably more often than any other species out there. And unfortunately it's caused such high cause of death, the rate of cause of death, that they just haven't been able to keep up. And so when the captive breeding program got online and we started putting birds out in the wild, we started increasing the population dramatically. In fact, today there's over 600 California condors alive, up from 22. So it's, we've come a long, long way. But unfortunately, that lead poisoning rate is still so high that in the absence of captive breeding, the population would be predicted to drop again.
Oh, wow. Huh. It's too bad that people wouldn't work a little harder on not using the lead bullets and stuff like that. But I guess cheaper way to go. When they're out shooting, I don't know. It's crazy.
There's a lot to unpack there, but I'll just maybe sum it up real quickly. That unfortunately, I think there's a very high expectation on hunters and ranchers to switch. And it's not really that realistic just yet because the market doesn't support all calibers. There's still some calibers that are very hard to find in non-lead, and so we're very sympathetic to the hunting and ranching community and actually provide free non-lead ammunition to people in and around where condors are trying to survive out there in the landscape. We think it's a really important win-win solution type approach.
Well, that's good to know. I mean, it's good that you're helping them with that as well and putting that out there for them. So,
Thank you.
All the way around winning situation. It helps the condors, helps them. Sounds great.
Yeah.
So back when you guys started doing this, did you believe that recovery was going to be possible with the condors, or no? Or were you doubtful at any point?
Yeah, it's funny. I remember vividly, I wrote an article for the organization that was printed in 1995 in our newsletter that went out to our members, and I remember it was titled something like "Our Greatest Conservation Challenge." And at that time, this was 1995, I predicted it would take 25 years to get to the point where the birds were self-sustaining and with, a population size where we could maybe start thinking about downlisting, not taking off the endangered species list entirely, but removed, from endangered to threatened. Well, that clock, of course, ran out in 2020. Here we are 6 years later, and it is painfully clear that lead poisoning from the ingestion of spent ammunition that they're getting from the carcasses that they consume still remains the biggest problem. And in the last 5 years, only one of those resulted in a net gain by the population in the absence of new birds being released from captivity. So in other words, 1 out of 5 years they showed signs of self-sustainability. The other 4, they didn't. And why? Because the lead poisoning death rate is still just too high. So we're not there yet, but we have, like I said, 600 condors in the wild. They're scattered in 4 different populations. We're going in the right direction, and making good headway, good progress on outreach to hunters and ranchers.
That's good news. That's really good news to hear. So hopefully the populations will keep, climbing up and getting bigger and start doing better with lead poisoning. So we can only hope.
Yeah, that's right.
Why don't you real quick give my listeners just a little bit more information about the California condors, kind of like their diet, habitat, how long do they live? I mean, do they just mate with one mate for life? Just a little more general information on them.
Yeah, great idea, because they really are unique in many ways. So it's good to understand just how they tick. For one thing, they're a very long-lived species. We think that they can live well over 50 years in the wild. We know that they can live over 50 in captivity. There's one who just turned 50, named Topa Topa. So they're a very long-lived species, and that, of course, corresponds with their slow reproductive rate. So kind of like people, we don't reproduce very quickly, and it takes a long time before we reach maturity. Same thing with the California condor. The big difference, though, we have 8 billion people on this planet, and the reason why is because we live well into our 70s and 80s, and our longevity is so good, mortality is so low. Conversely, the California condor mortality rate is so high that they've been unable to keep up. But let's see, they're obligate scavengers. I mentioned that. They eat pretty much only the remains of dead mammals and sometimes fish, rarely other birds. I don't even know if I've ever seen them feed on any other bird. But they'll range in size from a ground squirrel all the way up to a whale carcass that they will feed on. They do something interesting. So they live in hot environments, and when they need to cool down, they'll actually defecate on their own legs. It's called urohydrosis. It sounds really gross. I'm sure it is, but it's very effective. So imagine if you're flying, it's really hot out there, and now your legs are wet, and you just dangle them in the wind. Oh, that's a nice way to cool down, right? Well, that's what they do. It's one of the unique things that they do. They are they're definitely monogamous. Well, I wouldn't say monogamous. So this is really interesting, okay? Condors will mate for life. However, there have been change-ups in those pairings, and we've even seen trios, which is really fascinating to me, where we've had 2 females and 1 male, and sometimes 2 males and 1 female, and so it's worked both ways. Typically, condors will only have a pair, and they'll lay just 1 egg in that nest. That egg will then be incubated for 54 to 56 days. Interestingly enough, they incubate it with their feet. Most birds incubate with their breast. Their feathers fall out, and the skin becomes exposed, and they put their skin up against the egg. The condors don't do that. They just lay an egg in a cavity somewhere, like a redwood tree or a cliff face somewhere, lay the egg, and then kind of sit on it with their feet on top of it. And so it's the warmth of their feet that's doing the work of the incubation. And all throughout the whole entire nesting process, both members, or like I said, sometimes all 3 trio members, will all take part in the duties, from incubation to chick rearing to everything. So that's a really neat thing I love about these birds, is how cooperative they are. In fact, we can even determine when a pair has started nesting just by the behavior of the birds, because you'll never see them together. One's always in the nest and the other one's out looking for food. Yep. And so you can really use their own behavior to help manage the birds too. But anyway, that's a tangent. Let's see, what else about these amazing birds? Well, they don't migrate. Even though they fly huge distances, can fly 150 miles in a day or more. They don't migrate, so they're familiar with their entire range, and extremely social. One of the things I love about these birds the most is just how social they are. You almost never see a condor by itself. They're always with the group, and I think they even help each other out. I think I've even seen some form of altruism in these birds. Watching an adult bird feed a young bird, that's not even directly related, things like that. I think of condors as sort of like tribal, and it's really neat when you think of them that way.
Huh. Okay. Well, that's pretty. I guess that's a good way to describe them, as tribal. But it sounds like they're actually pretty cool birds. I mean, I know a lot of birds, will mate with each other and then help, with the young and stuff like that. But when you have the extras in there, like the extra female or the extra male, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And what I meant by tribal is just that it's such a small, close group of individuals, and they all seem to know each other, and they all interact with each other in some way.
Right.
And to me, it feels kind of like a, small tribe, if you will. Yeah. But, I guess as the population grows, and maybe I won't think of it the same way.
Maybe not. Maybe they'll get large enough. It could just be a large tribe, I guess. But
well, there you go. I hope they do become a large tribe, obviously.
Hopefully they do. Oh, that's great. So you have talked a little bit about that you guys released the condors and stuff into the wild. How does that process kind of work? I mean, what does it take to release a condor into the wild?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when we were getting started in the mid-'90s, we, I remember taking a trip down to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, because at the time that was the only place where condors existed in the wild, and there was only about a dozen or so, or maybe 20 condors in the wild when I first got started. And I said, do you have any kind of a manual, release manual, or anything written up? And they said, oh yeah, we got this big manual, and it was a huge, big thing, And so I said, oh great. I went back and I read through the whole thing, and I realized what the manual was calling for was essentially the construction of a small box, kind of a plywood box that's easily constructed, and the birds held there and acclimated to their new environment, and then released. And then that night, you take the whole box down and you just remove everything. So they're just out there in the wild. And the logic back then was condors needed to be kept wild. So we needed to be, at arm's length as best as possible. In the zoos, little puppets were used that made look like condors, so it would disguise the human caretaker. Out in the wild, every human worker would do their best to only work at night, for example. Things like that, and it just didn't work, I guess is the way to put it. The big problem that we had, our first 4 birds that we released in 1997, they weren't socialized with one another, and I don't think they were imprinted on their own species. I think they were a little bit more imprinted on humans, and I say that because when they were released, they approached people. One bird even went up to a tourist and pulled on their shoelaces. I mean, these birds were tame, to put it that way, and it was just a nightmare. And so we captured all 4 of those birds. One of them got sent to Arizona because it's one of our partners, releases condors in Arizona. And that bird actually did quite well for a number of years. The other 3 are still in captivity to this day, but at least they're contributing, new breeding stock for the wild. But anyway, we learned a really, really valuable lesson, and that was that these birds need some kind of an infrastructure in order to provide care and management afterwards. That was our biggest aha moment. And so we kind of pushed back on the manual, the direction that we were given, and said we want to do the opposite. We want to build a big flight pen where we can get these young condors out of the zoo at an early age and let them interact with each other. And hey, while we're at it, we want to put an adult condor inside with them so that they can interact with that adult condor and become imprinted on condors, not humans. And so we changed all that up. We worked closely with the zoos. The zoos did an amazing job of using the puppet less and instead relying on one-way glass so the chicks could view adult condors, and just sort of got out of the way, of the birds, because they just need to see each other when they're growing up, and they'll become great condors. But in the absence of seeing another condor during their upbringing, yielded some really bad behavioral traits. Anyway, once we figured that out, the birds have been keeping to themselves. You can kind of approach them because they're very curious. They're not afraid of you, but they don't approach you, and that's the biggest difference. And so these birds now are behaving just like the wild birds did before they were ever brought into captivity. And that was a huge hurdle in the first couple of years, and it really scared us because that first release was a failure, and then everything was on the line for that second release. And I'll go into a little bit more detail too. We put two different doors on the release pen that allow us a lot of control. So not only to release them in the first place, but later on, when we need to trap them because they're sick or injured, or we need to just put a new transmitter on or whatever, we just open up that door, bait it with food, sometimes even bait it with another condor, and they're so social, and then you can re-trap them that way.
Huh.
So having a facility out in the wild is absolutely essential, and in fact, because of the work that we did, it actually spread throughout the entire program, and all of our partners release the same way today.
Oh my God, that was great. I was going to ask too. You said something about a transmitter. Is that how you track and monitor the condors once you release them? Do they have like monitors on, or a GPS or something like that?
Yeah, you bet. Now, when we first started, GPS transmitters were not very common. They were extremely expensive, and they weren't that accurate. It wasn't until 2003 that we put GPS transmitters on condors for the first time, but all of the condors released have some kind of a tracking device so that we can determine, their movements, their whereabouts, their nesting, and if they die, we want to know why. It's super important that we understand those things.
Right.
Now, these GPS transmitters are so good, they can tell us where the condor is twice per minute, and it's so accurate. It's like plus or minus 10 feet or something like that. It's just an incredible tool. So now we can estimate where they're feeding, and then we can direct our non-lead outreach in those areas, contacting landowners and that kind of thing. We're very strategic outreach because of the GPS tracking technology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and it's come quite a ways too since it first came out. So it's probably a little easier nowadays than it was when it first came out to use it. Then, transmitters and stuff like that are smaller and everything like that. So.
Yeah, we've seen just a huge difference in the 30 years that we've been working with California condors.
Oh yeah. So, has there been an actual moment that made you think, yeah, this is actually working, what we're doing here?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think that first big hurdle of just how do we even release condors to the wild? How do we even get them started? Like that was a big question. Of course, the first question was how do the zoos breed them in captivity, but that was readily seen to come true. There was really no hesitation by the birds there. We worked out the techniques pretty early on, and then I'd say for 7 or 8 years we had a growing flock and almost no lead poisoning, but that's because the birds weren't going anywhere. And then all of a sudden they got older and more established, and they started expanding their range, and then we started getting into lead poisoning, and I went, oh boy, okay, what's going on? And then in 2007, or I guess it was 2007, California required the use of non-lead ammunition in the Condor range. So not statewide, but just in the Condor range. And then in 2019, they expanded and required non-lead ammunition use for the entire state. But unfortunately, at the same time, in 2019, a new law was passed that severely restricts the access to ammunition, and has then created a huge problem. Now we're seeing more lead poisoning now after the requirement to use non-lead than before, because of this other policy that came into play, and it's just messing things up.
Isn't that something?
It's kind of a long story, but there's moments where I felt like, oh yeah, we're on track, we're totally going to do this, and then there's been other times where we get set back like this, and I think, oh boy, I could still get there, but it's going to take longer. And now here we are, we're at 30 years, and I feel like we can still pull this off, but we have to resolve the lead poisoning problem, and so we still need more time in order to do that.
Right. Well, it sounds like someone needs to figure out getting that one law repealed or changed or something. I mean, oh my gosh. That's government for you. That's the government for you.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You're so right about that. But yeah, there's so much more I could share, but there is some hope that law is going to be repealed. There's a lot of people that think it's unconstitutional because it requires you to get a background check every time you buy ammunition. It's kind of like every time you fill up your car at the gas station, you got to get a background check.
Right.
So I think it's going to get repealed, but it has to go through the whole process, and meanwhile we're just we'll keep chipping away at it.
Yeah, that's all you can really do, but wish you guys luck out there with getting that one repealed, because that does sound kind of that's so silly.
Yeah, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it doesn't surprise me. Like I said, the government just never ceases to amaze me with some of the things they come up with and think is good, and then it's not good, and then the double thing going on. It just kills me. What do? You just keep chipping away at it, right?
That's right.
So, what role has Ventana Wildlife Society actually played in this effort? I mean, has it been Ventana that's been involved since '95 when you guys were asked to do this?
Well, yeah. So the Fish and Wildlife Service is the government agency, the federal government agency that is leading the recovery of the effort, and they conducted releases in Southern California in the early 90s to kind of show, that it was possible. The Los Angeles Zoo and the San Diego Zoo and one other zoo in Boise, Idaho, later on started captive breeding for release to the wild, and then in '95, that's when we got started. Our first release was in 1997. So our focus is release to the wild and figure out the underlying problems to result in a self-sustaining population. So that's ultimately our focus, working closely with the zoo partners. And it's amazing where that's taken us. When I first started, I had no idea we'd be handing out so much free ammunition to hunters and ranchers. I had no idea we'd be lobbying for reduction in excise tax on ammunition, or any number of these things that we're doing to try to chip away, as you say, and solve this problem. But here we are. You just figure out what needs to get done, and you do it.
Yeah, that's all you can do. I mean, really, that's all you can do. And just keep hoping. What are some misconceptions that you think people might have about condors or the conservation efforts involving them?
Yeah, there's a couple big ones, I think. So I think Disney has a role to play in this, because you think back to the cartoon character of the Condor. I'm sure it just popped into your mind just instantly, right? It
yes,
has the
did.
white ring around its neck.
One of them was a beetle.
Yep, he's like, he kind of talks real dumb like,
Oh, yeah.
It's terrible. It's the worst PR nightmare that you can imagine. It's so far from the truth. The Condor is actually one of the more intelligent birds out there, in my opinion. So it's really, injustice how they were portrayed all those years. And so I think that stuck with us. People think that they can barely fly because they're so big. They have to take a big running start to take off and fly. No, that's not really true. Another thing I can't stand, every time the press covers the Condor, they almost always figure out a way to put a little plug in there that somehow the Condor is like a dinosaur. And it just drives me nuts. People think, oh, it's a big bird, it must be a dinosaur. Oh, come on. No. All birds today are pretty much dinosaurs, but they're no older than any other. Yeah, anyway, it's just ridiculous. Condors are not dinosaurs.
I understand. I know. Raptors were birds. I mean...
Well, right. I mean, you've probably looked at the news articles and stuff, and if you didn't notice it, you go back and look, and sure enough, probably 6 out of 10 articles will plug in there somewhere that the Condor is some dinosaur relic or whatever. So hopefully that goes away, because that is not accurate either. And then lastly, in terms of their conservation, there just wasn't enough education being done on this lead ammunition issue in the early years, and then it went straight to a ban, and that really got things controversial, and that's when people started lying, and that's when a lot of misconception about the motivation behind the non-lead requirement. There were a lot of folks saying it was a kind of a backdoor attempt to take away hunting or shooting, and quite frankly, that was one of the reasons why early on we stepped up and said, no, we're giving away bullets to people. If that's what you think, then you're mistaken.
Right. Let me give you some ammo for that gun.
Well, yeah, exactly. And we've made a lot of friends over the years.
I'll bet.
If you think about it, I mean, hunters and ranchers, they're sitting on the best wildlife habitat in the country. We need them.
Oh my gosh! I bet you got a lot of good friends out there with that program. That's funny.
Yeah, after doing it for we started in 2012, so I mean we're on our 15th year now.
Oh wow, that's crazy.
So,
but
gimmick.
It helps. It helps the condors, and it makes the ranchers and them happy. So again, like I said, win-win.
Yep, and we know it's working. A paper just came out that evaluated it and shows that it's helping.
Well, there you go. I mean, now you've got statistics behind there too. That's great. So
exactly.
Anything that'll work, right? I mean, it just helps to get you where you need to be. So, is there anything in particular though that, as you might say, keeps you up at night when you think about the future of the Condor? Something you just can't kind of wrap your head around. One of those kinds of things where you just keep thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, one of my biggest fears is getting to my retirement age, which is about 10 years, and still not have a self-sustaining population of condors. And that that is definitely one of those kind of nightmarish thoughts, spending your whole entire career and then feel like it's still not quite successful. That would be rather devastating to put all that effort into it. And I think there's people all around the world that would be disappointed too, and I don't want to let them down. It's not like this recovery species is all on my shoulders, but we play a big part in it, and I want to see it through. So that's a biggie. But that's, I guess, the reason why we're just so driven to succeed. So we don't find ourselves in that situation.
Right. Exactly.
And I think about this. It's called the Safety for All Act. It's the new policy that came into play that requires the background checks. And who would have ever thought that something like that would cause such a huge problem for availability of non-lead? And so right when 2019 came around and the state of California, the entire state was requiring non-lead, I was super hopeful. I was thinking, oh great, manufacturing is going to pick up. We're going to start seeing a lot more non-lead options and all the calibers, and it's going to start going in the right direction, and we're going to be done. And then this background check thing came in, and it prevents you from buying ammunition online and having it shipped to your doorstep. You have to go to a local store, and we know that half of the stores in the Condor range don't even carry some of these important calibers. So, we just need to solve these kind of structural problems, these market level problems, and policy too. It's really both. I think we're beyond the biology. We know everything we need to know about how to recover these birds, their reproduction, release, all of that. It's really now just down to changing behavior and modifying the market and policy so that it supports a self-sustaining population in the long run.
Most definitely. And that's the thing, you got to get people out there to talk to these lawmakers and stuff like that and let them know what they want done and everything and try to get them to do it. And that's obviously one way that everyday people can kind of help out, to protect the condors and, not just condors, but other wildlife as well. But are there any other ways that people could kind of try to help out when it comes to helping to protect them?
Well, there's definitely, you can financially contribute to any of the groups that are directly working with the birds. And as you said, there's the policy issue, depending on where you are. Condors are only found in California and Arizona and Utah and Baja California, Mexico. So, it's somewhat limited there. There's no federal policy that I'm aware of at this point in time. But we are hopeful that the federal government will begin funding at least a small match again. The private partners contribute somewhere around $7 to $8 million a year, and the federal government was pitching in around $1.5 million, and then they stopped. And so now it's all falling on the private partners. And so we're in this difficult situation right now of how to keep things going, knowing there's so much work still to be done in the face of no federal funding, and just relying on private support makes it a little tougher.
Yeah, most definitely.
So yeah, sorry, and just to finish that thought, you could call your federal House of Representatives or senator and tell them that you would like to see dedicated funding go toward the recovery of the California condor. And there is actually a federal lobbying effort underway at present to try to achieve that, and I'm participating in it. So I guess no matter where you are, you could call your representative and tell them how much you want condors to make it, and there's an opportunity for them to do that by increasing and putting back funding toward condor recovery.
Yeah, yep. I know I years ago went to the Grand Canyon with my kids and my niece and stuff, and I was really hoping to see some of the condors flying around up there, but I never did get to see any of them. Yeah, well, that's okay, though. Maybe one day I'll get to see some of them up there.
come to Big Sur or Pinnacles National Park in Central California.
Yeah.
And they'll have another opportunity there.
Well, there you go. If I ever make it over that way, I'll have to definitely go take a trip and see if I can see them, because I think that would be really cool to see them. Bald eagles, too. I would really like to see those. I've never seen one of them either, so I think it'd be cool. So now that you're kind of looking back over time and everything in your journey, what has this journey kind of meant to you personally?
Gosh. Well, one of the things that I really cherish about this opportunity is that it's given me lots of different experiences. I've learned a lot of different things that I never thought I would learn when I was a wildlife biologist in undergraduate school, and then offered this opportunity way back when. So it's been tremendously fun to just learn so many different things, not just biology and science, but also even fundraising and accounting and just kind of every aspect of what it takes to run a nonprofit and run a successful program and have a team of people that are motivated and excited to come to work every day and get work done. And all of that's just been just tremendously rewarding. And I just think to myself that if we can be truly successful with the California Condor, that we will be creating hope for people all around the world. People who care about wildlife anyway. I think it's an opportunity to instill hope, because so many people thought the condor was a goner. My wildlife professor in undergraduate school, I remember vividly, he's even saying that. He's like, "Oh, condor's going to go extinct in your lifetime, blah 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 blah." Mm. And now here I am, 30 years into an effort to try to reverse that. And it's just a really cool opportunity. I never thought I would have had that opportunity. So I'm blessed. I feel honored, and just trying to do the best I can.
Right. I was in high school when those populations dropped down to that 22 number. So I remember hearing about it, hearing about the condors and that the population had declined really badly. So, yeah. Between that and the DDT and stuff that was used, and with the bees and stuff like that too. So, we've done a lot of things to harm our environment. Be nice to start cleaning it up.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was just going to say you're absolutely right. We sure have messed up a lot of things, but it's really hopeful when something is returned back to nature and recovered, or a whole chunk of land is restored, or a dam is removed and a river can flow freely again, and the salmon can go upstream. All those kinds of things, they give hope, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, most definitely. And that's what the world needs nowadays is I think a little more hope to keep carrying on with the way things are going. But well, we're kind of winding down on the podcast, so basically, I guess one last thing we'd like to do before we end this is let people know where they can learn more about the California Condor or about the Ventura Wildlife Society.
Oh, well, actually, could you say that again? The Ventana Wildlife Society.
Did I say it wrong?
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's common. It's
Ventana Wildlife Society. Okay, sorry about that.
No problem. Well, yeah, there's lots of ways to stay involved, even if you're remote and living anywhere in the world. We have live streaming cameras. We also have a tool called Condor Spotter, so if you do see the condors in person, you can identify the individual with the tag that's on their wing, and then learn all about the bird, its history, and its biography. On monthly meetings on Zoom and on our YouTube channel, the last Thursday of the month, we have what we call the Condor Chat, and our team of biologists provide updates from the field. to all of our supporters and whoever's listening in at the time, and been doing that since 2020. Of course, you can donate, and our website is ventanaws.org, like is in Ventana Wildlife Society. We have an event in Carmel Valley on June 7th coming up, and there's even an online auction component to that, which is from May 28th to June 8th. So even if you're in Arizona, where you are, or wherever, you could participate. And everyone who signs up for the auction or attends in person will have a opportunity to win a trip with me to go see the condors at the Condor Sanctuary in Big Sur.
Oh, that's very cool. Boy, I hope people will get involved and put in some bids at your auction and stuff. I'm glad you threw that out there so people knew about that. So that'd be really cool to be able to win a trip to go see the condors.
Well, and like I mentioned with that federal funding change, we definitely could use the support. So thanks for asking about that, and thanks so much for having me on your podcast.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to join me tonight to give us more information about the California condor and how they're doing nowadays. It was great being able to talk with you, but you are more than welcome. I'm going to announce my next couple podcasts coming up, and you're more than welcome to jump off because I know people have things to do, or you can stay on if you want and listen to my upcoming announcements, but that's up to you. So.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for being on again. Thanks, Kelly.
Okay. Bye-bye, Lori.
Bye. All right, everybody. So we're just going to go ahead and talk about the next upcoming podcasts. I thought that was so great to have Kelly on with me tonight and get all this great information about the California condors and all the conservation efforts that's been going on since the 90s and everything they've been doing. And like I said, I remember when hearing about the condor population tanking like it did, and it was crazy. And we did really, I mean, I know if you're younger, you guys don't remember that stuff, but yeah, we weren't sure if we were going to have California condors around anymore. So we thought we were going to lose them all. So good to hear that they've been able to bring them back and that we now have over 600 of them out in the wild. That's pretty cool. So, and it's good news. Good news. We don't want to lose those birds. They're really cool. All right. And with that being said, so my next podcast is actually called Buzzkill or Breakthrough. It's the truth about honeybee health. And I'm going to have Matthew Miluka on with me from the Honeybee Health Coalition. I hope I said Matthew's name correctly. And we are going to talk all sorts of stuff about honeybees, and their health and how they're doing, because I don't know if you guys have heard this or not, but you do know that the honeybee populations have also been in declining. And I don't know if you guys realized, if we lose honeybees, that is not a good thing. Those are our pollinators. Those are our agricultural little workers that helped pollinate all of that stuff and for all the fruit and the food and stuff that we have. So we really don't want to lose our honeybees, and we certainly don't want Africanized bees taking over either. So anyway, Matthew's going to come on and talk with me on May 28th about honeybees and how they're doing and what we can do to help with honeybees. So if you're interested in that topic, please come on back and listen on May 28th. And then the next one after that is going to be on June 11th, and I think this is really a cool one. It's Project Freedom Ride, and that is Roman and Jennifer McCann. Roman is 13 now. He started Project Freedom Ride with his mom and dad, helping out back when I think he was around, I want to say it was 5? I want to say 5. But anyway, so he's been doing it for a number of years now, and he's helping his family and him help these dogs and stuff get transported to where they may be able to be adopted and stuff like that. When they're, maybe not going to get adopted in one area, they get them to another. And they're in Georgia, and they're operating there and doing this. And I'm not sure how far they go, but we're going to find out all about Project Freedom Ride from Roman and Jennifer on June 11th, and they're going to tell us all about what they do and how long they've been doing it and why they started it. But I think it's a really cool thing when you have a kid like Roman that wants to get involved and help rescue animals and do what he can to make sure, they find good homes. So I think that'll be great, and hopefully you guys and your kids will all be able to listen in on June 11th and learn more about Project Freedom Ride. So anyway, that's the next couple podcasts that I got coming up, and hopefully you guys will be able to come back and listen to the Buzzkiller Breakthrough, Truth About Honeybee Health, and with Matthew, and then again on June 11th when I have Roman and Jennifer on, and we talk about Project Freedom Ride. So I'm looking forward to both those podcasts. I think they're going to be really good. And with that being said, that pretty much wraps up the podcast for tonight, you guys. I don't know if you've noticed, but I did change my profile picture artwork and stuff like that. I kind of upgraded and updated it. I think it turned out really well, and it looks good. So hopefully you guys like the new change up of that. I like it, and happy. So anyway, all right, you guys, I hope you all stay safe out there this weekend. Don't get into too much trouble doing things, and go enjoy and have fun wherever you're at. All right, have a good night now.